Hi, I'm a higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. While issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion are really important to me, I haven't always understood how the practices and policies of my department sometimes keep students from underrepresented minorities from having the experience that they need to have on our campus and with my office. That's why today I am so excited to talk to Anice Barbosa, who's going to be telling us a little bit about how she developed an inclusive and equitable student ambassador program at her institution. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, the podcast designed for higher education marketers. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt, and I am so excited to have this opportunity to share insights and inspiration. With Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, I'm designing a different kind of podcasting experience. With each episode, I'll be bringing in a guest for a deep dive into the challenges and joys we all face in higher education marketing. After each episode, you can join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag HigherEdCMO. I would love to see this become like a book club, but for a podcast. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at JamieHuntIMC. That's JamieHuntIMC for more opportunities to connect. So today I am here with Anice Barbosa, who is the Digital Marketing Director at Wheaton College, Massachusetts. Hi, Anice. It's great to have you on the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited about this topic that we're going to discuss today. But first, I really wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about your higher ed journey to kind of set the stage for our conversation.
Like you mentioned, I am the Director of Digital Marketing at Wheaton College in Massachusetts. I have a background in agency work prior to Wheaton, and I found myself really compelled with the mission of higher education when I was ready to leave agency. So I started at Wheaton in a social media capacity, and I did it for about 8 years. It's kind of like the thing that brought me into marketing in general. And during the pandemic, I, like a lot of people, started looking at my career and reevaluating where I wanted it to go. Digital marketing just felt like the next thing for me. I was promoted in the fall of 2021 into this role. I still oversee social media as part of this role. I also oversee our web and our paid marketing as well.
And you are such a great addition to the higher ed digital marketing sort of community, and I love that you're already presenting at conferences and doing all of that. What sparked my interest in talking with Anice was she recently presented on creating an equitable and inclusive student ambassador program, and I think that's a really important topic. And you presented at the CASE Social Media and Community Conference. For the purpose of the presentation, what do you mean by student ambassadors?
We have different student ambassador programs at Wheaton. There's some that work for admission, some that work for athletics, and all sorts of they're the four, again, play the ambassador role for our institution. For the purpose of my presentation, I'm talking about the ones that work with us on social media. So we employ a small team of 3 content creators. They are the face of our institution on Instagram, TikTok, previously on Snapchat when we created content there. They also work in conjunction with our content team. They do photography. Again, 3 student employees who work as an extension of the core marketing team. There are several models for this across campus, but our students kind of really embody the work that we do. They're not just task masters, right? They do all sorts of really strategic things for us. As we all know, students want to hear from their peers, not necessarily from the institution. So they play a really crucial role in our marketing. So that's why we call them ambassadors and interns or student workers, because they're truly taking on a really big responsibility and a major role in the messages that we put out into our communities.
Based on your presentation, you talked a little bit about running into an understanding that your student ambassador program was maybe not as inclusive or diverse as you might hope at the institution that you're at. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
For full disclosure, I am a person of color, so if you're only hearing this through audio, you don't know that. I am African, and I'm always aware of that fact and how many spaces I'm the only one. And when we began creating content in these very external and highly visible ways, it was apparent to me and also to our community that perhaps we are not showing our students, all of our students, we're not being representative in the kind of students that attend Wheaton. I had been managing our social media for maybe 2 years before I got my first message, but when I did, it was from somebody I cared about that was like, oh, how dare you type of situation. Like, you are a person of color. How come you guys continue to hire only white students or even a certain category of students to carry the Wheaton message? And it gave me pause. I think being called in this way, first, it like hit me where it hits most people first, in your ego. You're like, well, but I'm doing all the right things. I'm posting the position. I'm doing outreach. I've interviewed so many students of color or even diverse students in general, not just students like that look like I do. But how come I'm not hiring them? So it made me stop and think. And in 2020, when everybody was kind of like checking in on what are we doing to become more anti-racist? What are we doing to create accessible spaces and places for belonging? It made me stop and think and look at everything that we're doing.
So when in your presentation, you talk a little bit about sort of going back to ground zero and figuring out how you've been recruiting students, and how did you approach getting that information from the students you recruited and those you didn't recruit?
It was really hard because, again, you're asking people to evaluate something that you did and something that hurt them. Like I would say that there were at least one person that the outcome of my hiring hurt them personally. I damaged a personal relationship. So going back and being like, hey, can you tell me what it is that I did? And, and it's like, I should know, right? It was a very vulnerable experience for me. I started with the students that we have and just asking them about their experience, and things began to click for me, right? So something as small as like, send me a sample of your work, right? Which is not uncommon for you to ask somebody who is going to be a content creator or even take photos to send samples of your photos. And then just looking at like the students that had access to great equipment in high school, great mentorship, or even personal equipment, provided the better examples. And students who don't have access to those things didn't, right? And it was like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? This is not a fair practice. So I started initially with our students, and then once those things began clicking for me, I knew where I went wrong. So and starting to look like, where am I asking for referrals? Am I creating kind of like this tiny little niche group that click almost, like that people who know each other refer people to this job? Am I recruiting from a specific major? Am I recruiting from a specific pool? So things like that began to click for me first. And when I reached out to the students that I did not hire, I went in with a more clear of like, okay, I understand what went wrong here. This is what I'm thinking of making this better. What do you think? Do you think this is a sound plan? Am I missing anything? I would say from that kind of point of introspection, the conversations were a little bit easier, and the input that I got from the students that I did not hire was very valuable. So they pointed out things like, not everybody is a film and new major, film and new media studies major. Some of us are in business, some of us are in marketing, some of us are in creative writing. And again, are you asking for referrals from the people that you already hire. Maybe all of their friends look like them, right? Which professors are you reaching out to? Which community members are you reaching out to? So the conversations were richer, and perspectives that I had not considered came up in this, but by no means were they easy. It took quite a bit of time to walk through all of them, but I kind of started to do my own discovery before I involved students, because the last thing I wanted to do was come up like, can you tell me what I did wrong and how to make this better, right? I think that work was still mine, but also wanted their input.
Yeah. You also talk a little bit about that they felt that the content that was being created wasn't telling the whole story of the institution or wasn't diverse enough. Can you tell me a little bit about the feedback that you were getting on that?
Yes. So this goes back several years. So like we used to get like random things like, oh, you only show certain aspects of student life. So our student ambassadors, like the way that they create content is like we look at what is happening on campus and then pick the events we want to cover or the photos we want to take. And a lot of it, because we lean so much into the authenticity for the students, they end up being things that the individual students want to do. So for example, we had 2 students who were like highly involved in like arts. And so we ended up covering a lot of arts. And the other student was really interested in just like landscape photography or architecture photography. So it ended up looking like that. So our feed for a long time, you can even go to our Instagram and scroll back and see, it was just campus photography, very little student life. And our story content was very much artsy, right? And it wasn't holistic of the college. There's just so much more that happens at Wheaton. And I think we were also very much tied into maintaining an aesthetic look to our Instagram, keeping the grid beautiful, like fall foliage, spring flowers, snow during winter, that it wasn't a good and full picture of what Wheaton is and what our students look like, or even student life looks like. So when I started, first I checked it up to being like, all right, it is what it is, right? It's authentic. These are the students that we have. So I dismissed a lot of that feedback initially. I'm like, I know I'm doing my part in providing an authentic representation. And from my perspective, a lot of it felt holistic, right? I'm like, I'm showing student clubs. Yeah, it's arts and other things, but I'm showing that they're student clubs, showing that we have thematic team houses, right? From this perspective, I'm showing kind of like the big buckets, but the nitty gritty of it. I think I was quick to dismiss that, right? Because I thought my job was done in having a student tell the story of the student experience, and not dig too deep into the granular part of it. And this is where I'm being like really vulnerable about what it is. Like, it's not that we didn't have a social strategy, we did, but I just don't think any of us like thought and dug deep enough to see like which stories are we telling? Are people seeing themselves in them? Are the students that we want to attract to Wheaton seeing people like them or hearing stories that resonate with them? I don't think we did initially look at it from that angle.
Hey all, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. I want to take just a quick moment to thank my friends at Nectar who made this new Enrollify podcast possible. Nectar brings affordable communications infrastructure to college campuses. It's like Slack, but for the higher ed student experience. Nectar integrates seamlessly with all major LMSs, making it easy for instructors and administrators to build emergent learning communities in all of their classes and groups without the extra work. Their focus is on boosting student engagement and reducing instructor stress by building a learning community in every classroom. By leveraging familiar technology like instant messaging channels, Nectar prepares students for the remote yet collaborative work environment of the future. You can learn more about their platform by heading on over to Nectar, that's nectir.io, and be sure to tell the team that Jaime sent you their way. So what changes did you end up making to the recruitment process for recruiting student ambassadors?
Several changes. One, we expanded the program because we started with 1 ambassador and then we added 2 more. So again, like, we're a very small school, but for us, like, 2 more positions than we had is big, and we're hoping to continue to expand. This year, we actually just posted our vacant position So one, we added more positions, and two, the recruitment process itself, before it was just, we asked our students who are currently employed if they knew other people who wanted to be interested. And then we would reach out to our admission counterpart and ask for referrals from any students, from the tour guides, from the students who do info sessions and interviews, if there were any that would make for great personalities for content. So that was the extent of it. I think one year we posted the position publicly, and the next year we didn't. So now we post the position public really early on. It's already been, our semester doesn't start until the end of this month, and we posted our position in July. So we open it up to everybody. We keep it open up until the first week of classes, giving everybody the opportunity to apply. We advertise it on our social accounts. We share on our social accounts. I shouldn't say advertise. We share on our social accounts, and we expanded the group of people that we reach out to. So now we solicit referral from professors at large, the ones that we have relationships with, and we also send it to professors that we think, hey, you might know people that we don't. So we look at the business program, we look at all the creative and the business programs. And we also solicit feedback from club leaders, like from students themselves, right? We send an email to everybody who's a club leader being like, hey, do you know somebody who would be good for this? And from our peers, from staff peers, like we're talking about people in student life or in student organization management. We talk to our peers in our multicultural center, our Office of Institutional Equity and Belonging. We're really mindful about just expanding the pool of referrals, so we're not relying on a single source. So that looks very different. That's just the recruitment part of it. The application itself, before we used to ask somebody to send a sample. Now we eliminated that. Like as I mentioned, it kind of like created this system, the haves and have-nots, and now like we don't have that at all. We just have a simple form where you fill out why you want to work for us. And as part of the interview process, everybody gets asked to submit a 15-second clip of like a random prompt. Last year we did a day in the life content, and everybody has to do it on a phone. And if you don't have a phone, or if you want to use a more high-tech phone, we make our office phone available to our students, so that like your content won't look different because you don't have access to equipment. And the interview process is not just me. It will be me, our social media manager, and once we get down to our finalists, we will ask our current students to also weigh in, and because again, they know each other, they know which spaces they occupy, and know like how an additional person or two people would complement them. So these are all the changes that we have made in the recruitment and process, and we also made a ton more in the retention side of things, and I'm happy to talk about those as well.
Tell me about that. What did you do on the retention side?
So again, it's just not bringing people in, it's keeping them in. I brag that, like, not just me, like my manager previously too, we used to brag that we have the best job on campus, that once our students were in, they never wanted to leave, because it's a lot of fun. So I wanted to make sure that if I'm bringing people from underrepresented communities, that they felt the same sense of belonging in these places. So we meet once a week with our students, one-on-one, to plan our week. Like half of the meeting is that, the other half is knowing what is it that you're going through. We have very deep personal relationships with our students. They know we are a resource for them outside of work. You're not just here to do work. We're invested in your career at Wheaton. We want to make sure that you are successful. We communicate that from the beginning, that your first and only priority is graduating. And we are all on that same boat. So if at any point academics needs to take precedence over the work that you're doing, that's okay. So we create that space, right? That we're all here for you. You get to work with us and do fun stuff and important work. We make that clear that it's important work, but that your main priority is that it's getting through college, and we're here and committed to you and getting you to the finish line. And we've had students who have had to take like a week, 2 weeks off, or even a full semester off because of academic pressures. And we create that culture of understanding. And besides that, like we do outings with our students at least once a semester. We'll go off campus for lunch or for like boba tea or something like that. And we have also created a line in our budget to support equipment. For a lot of these ambassador programs, I know Wheaton is not the only one. Sometimes we end up relying on student equipment, student phone for content creation, or even their own personal cameras if they have access to it. We invested a significant amount of money in creating kind of like a starting point. So we have a camera, a phone, a tripod, ring light, these things, just have them accessible. So if you have one and you want to use yours, great. But if you don't, that you don't feel like you're behind the ball. Again, just like providing like the basics to get work done. And for that part of it, it's a continual investment every year. It's a permanent line in my budget. And we talk about it, like, what is it that you want to try? Like last year, one of the purchases that we made was for a gimbal for a camera, because one of our students wanted a stable environment to shoot video in. And it makes sense. Like, you're studying film inside the classroom and you probably don't have a ton of opportunity to practice that, and this job might allow you to. And if it makes sense for us, which it did, we ended up buying it. So we look at it from this holistic view, right? Like you would any other person who works for you. You want to keep them engaged. You want to keep them happy, feeling like they belong, feeling like you're invested in their learning and their growth. We have just extended it down to our students, which I think it's the only way to go, but it wasn't always that way.
So it sounds like you're creating equitable practices. So before it was maybe equal, everybody has the equal opportunity to apply, but you're creating practices that allow people, like you said, without equipment or without having that training in their high school experience or whatever, to have the same playing field or the same opportunity to represent the university. And it's not really a checkbox.
No, absolutely not. And Again, this goes even further. Like these are just like small aspects of the job, but like one of the things that I took on this past semester is looking at compensation, right? One of the pieces of feedback that I got from previous students was like, this is not a minimum wage job, right? And it isn't. Anybody who manages social justice content creation can tell you it is not a minimum wage job. So part of the review that we did, we increased the pay for our students. And it's something as small as that, and you're still fighting for resources internally, but also advocating for lifting the cap on what students can earn. Any other institution has a cap on student earnings for student jobs, right? So for me this past semester, this is what I focused on, is advocating with college leadership to increase the stipend for students. It had not been reviewed since 2006, and just for inflation alone, it should be way more than what it is. And I was really excited this July when I got an approval that not just for my students, but for all of our student employees, the cap was lifted. And again, it takes kind of this intentional work to get there. And something that started as a superficial audit of how many photos of underrepresented populations do we have on Instagram became this thing that is more meaningful, that took more effort, that is not 5% duties as assigned, but it is incredibly important. So that is my goal, to continue to explore this and what other inequities do we have, and continue to listen to our students when they come to us with kind of these pain points, because I think it's so easy to dismiss. But my commitment to our student workers and truly to myself is to continue to stay open and listen and remove my ego a little bit from it, because I think it can get a little tricky.
So with that in mind, how did the content shift once you started recruiting a more diverse and inclusive group of students? How did the content on your social platforms change?
Oh my God, it's entirely different. So I would say if you go back and look, just our Instagram, because it is probably the easiest to kind of assess this, is just seeing everything prior to 2021 and everything since we've made these changes. It is more vibrant. We are getting all sorts of things. We have athletics content. We have our student clubs, all of them. Truly, we have the dance club, we have the social justice and community impact activities. It just looks entirely different. It's more vibrant. And now that we have more students, there are different styles, right? We have reels that shows some of our more quirky students, more artsy students and what they're doing. We have stuff from our farm group. Because again, when you have a more diverse pool with more diverse interests, like that content bubbles up, right? Like we have a student that's really committed to like mental health on campus. And so a lot of the events that she'll want to cover come from that angle. One of our students is very entrenched in the arts and performance arts. So a lot of the content that she ends up putting together is that. And one of our students is really involved in student government and advocacy. So like, again, we're getting like different aspects of student life and what it is that you can do at Wheaton. So it looks entirely different. Even things that we used to do before, like study abroad content, like getting their perspectives and their input. I'm like, you know what, maybe we should take this approach to covering it, not the way that it has always been done. So from like a visual perspective and what we end up putting together, it looks different, but also from like the way we think about it, right? Having more input from students who are closer to our target audience, it helps a ton.
Yeah, I bet. I think it's really important to have the insights of the audience and to say, yeah, this is just curated, very carefully curated marketing content versus something that's a much more authentic representation of your campus community. I think that makes a big difference. And Gen Z is really savvy. I think they know when something is just a curated marketing spun photo or video or whatever. And this more authentic voice, I think, is something that they probably resonate more with. Has that been your experience? Have you gotten positive feedback about those changes?
Oh, absolutely. I think before we used to get called out, like, you know, an incident would happen. Again, we pull from the playbook, here's the institutional response to it. And then right away, like we would get those comments, right? Like, you're truly not about this type of comment. And sometimes, like, again, the way our students, like, were the face of the institution on Instagram, it opened up a lot of our students to unfair criticism. But I think now, like, I'm not saying we have solved all the world's problems. We certainly haven't. We still get from time to time, but I think it's less frequent. And it's not about the content we're creating in times of non-crisis, right? Like we get positive feedback from our community members, from our current students when they see each other, when they see their event feature, when they see their club being propped up in this capacity. It's building community, right? Like you're seeing your institution kind of elevate the work that you're doing as a student, and again, having positive interactions before the negative ones come makes easier to navigate like negative situations. We have received feedback from prospective parents. We have received feedback from prospective students. Our Welcome to Wheaton Day, which is like admitted students stay on campus, one of the pieces of feedback that we got was that our Instagram content made them feel like they already knew the place, and that they were happy that the day lived up to that kind of expectation that they already had. So hearing things like that validate us a lot in where we're headed. We still have much work ahead. I don't think we have figured out all the parts of this, but it does keep us inspired and encouraged in following this path.
So what you talked about doing was, like you said, difficult work that had forced you to kind of get outside of yourself and to ask tough questions about what you were doing. Why is it important to do that? Like, why is it critical that we take this approach to our communications?
I think, again, like I'm coming at this from a perspective of somebody who was like, full transparency, I was like, I know what it's like to be left out and feeling like you're not belonging. So I didn't think I was capable of creating that space. So, and again, like in my presentation, I had a quote about like, our knowledge often stops at our level of privilege. And this is something that I heard from another speaker, Rosa Mejia Cruz from University of Kentucky, on another webinar, and it resonated with me, right? So this was about checking my privilege, right? So it's like, I am not capable of that. I'm doing all the right things. I know what it's like to be left out. So all of these like things were like messages that I was telling myself that I was incapable, or there's no way that I as a Black woman could create inequitable practices. But to be honest, like it kind of hit home when one of the students that was in an interview process blocked me on social.
Oh,
just
wow.
because I had hurt them at that level, right? They're like, wait, I thought you really like were looking for somebody like me, or to hear our perspective as a student, and I was like, okay, like, and I think once you hear that from somebody, you have to slow down, right? And check yourself. And for me, it was painful to confront myself because, again, I thought I would be exempt from this.
Right.
And again, detaching like my personal feelings, right? Because I'm not the one who was like hurt by the situation, or the one who felt like something didn't work out. Again, I stayed engaged, right? Like I opened myself up even when I was uncomfortable, and it was really hard, like I remember that at the end of the conversation with this particular person, I felt so sad. Like, and again, I ended the conversation, I sat down and like thought like I have to do different, like I can't be part of this narrative, and understanding that like it's not a checklist about having 6 photos every 50, right, or something like that. It's not about optics. It's challenging my privilege, challenging my work, and listening to others, especially to our audience when they tell us you're not getting it right. So it's again, it's removing yourself from it. Because again, I experienced both, like feeling left out. So I didn't think I was capable of creating that for other people, but I am.
So did you get any pushback or run into any obstacles in doing this approach, maybe from leadership or from other parts of the university? Did you run into any of that?
I say this all the time, like I rarely have to convince leadership of these things. Like Wheaton is deeply committed to this, and my VP was one of the first people, like we talked about this as setting this as a divisional goal for our team, right? And I understood that a lot of the work had to be done on my own time, but I would need input from my coworkers. I would need their involvement in the recruitment process, or even input in the review that I'm doing of our content. So I didn't really run up against that. Like the one part where it was more challenging was advocating for budget, right? So I went and shot for the sky because maybe I'll land like somewhere in the moon or in the stars, but maybe I won't get the whole universe. But that was the one hard part. It was like advocating for it. And we do have this interest, like this really kind of institutional-wide body. It's called DEAL, Diversity, Equity, and Access Leadership Group. And this body also kind of takes up causes like this. So I kind of just like looked around in my community and where I could find support, and DEAL was a partner that helped me advocate for budget because, I knew I couldn't do it alone. I knew that proposing a stipend increase for my 3 positions would take care of my problem. But I knew I wasn't the only one having this problem. And if we're going to address it, let's address it at the root cause and do it for everybody. So I brought this cause to DEAL earlier this year, and they were on board. I had support of faculty and staff when it came time to put a proposal in front of our student employment group in the budget office. I had involvement from professors from the economics department and mathematics. Because we all employ students, sending impact to everybody, and and I think when the whole institution embodies these values and principles and we're all on board, the work is a lot easier. Not saying it is easy, period, because it took like several rounds of back and forth, but having that kind of community support absolutely helped. And because otherwise it would have been really lonely and really hard. And again, it made me feel like I was doing something greater than me and for more than just my students. And it encourages me to keep going because, like a lot of GEI work ends up falling to people who are probably victims of the poor practices and the unfair practices, but having kind of that community support was great. Again, I think it's a lot easier at an institution like Wheaton. I do understand that not everybody is in the same position, but I think the same rules apply. Is like finding your community, finding those positions those people who are open to doing this with you, figuring out who the decision makers are, which points do they want to hear, again, and building your argument from that perspective. But it's definitely not work that one person can do alone.
Well, I think about the work that you did, and I look back at my time, for example, at an HBCU. It's making me think about how, were we truly equitable in our practices, or were we pulling from the same types of students and not projecting the full image of the campus? And I think about a time when somebody commented, you're only sharing photos of women that have straightened hair, or they don't have natural hair. And it was like, oh my God, we weren't doing it intentionally, and it wasn't something that we at all consciously thought about. And I'm not actually sure if it was fully true, but it was a good moment to kind of think about, is there bias in what we're doing? And it's always the Royal Court students who are appearing things. There's always the super involved students. What about the students who are commuter students, or the students who are not in every club, or maybe they're not involved in things as much because they have to work, 40 hours a week outside of being a student. And I don't like unpaid internships, because I think that requires a level of privilege in your personal life to be able to do an unpaid internship. So making sure our internship's paid. But now it's like, well, but were they paying enough? Should we have been paying students a little bit more so that they didn't have to have that second job to pay their bills? And it's just really an eye-opening presentation, an eye-opening conversation.
Yeah, and I think like what you're pointing out is like absolutely right. So these are perspectives that you're hearing, and this is why I say it's not a checklist, it's ongoing work, right? Like you have to stay continuously open and engaged, and one of the things that we have incorporated as like part of our practices is like at the end of every academic year, we do a check-in with our students. Like, how is this working for you? Are there things that we can be doing better? And taking that time to listen, right? And like one of the things that we heard this year was like, all right, the cap is like too much, but I also want to be able to do X, Y, and Z on my own time as a freelance photographer. Are there ways that I can do this on this campus? And it's like, I don't know, but let me find out, right? Like, because I still think as a manager, that is my job, right? To find these opportunities for my employees. Because if my web developer came to me right now and said, hey, I love doing development work, but there's opportunity to do design, I would go and seek out those opportunities for him. So keeping that kind of open-mindedness and constant engagement with our students has helped, and also with our community. So if we even positive feedback, and if they're like, oh my God, I love this content from this place, and like, hey, like, what do you do? Is there anything interesting happening with you? Like, or even checking with our partners, are there any cool things happening on our campus like that we are not featuring? Are there like my social media manager and I often look back and being like, you know what, these are the type of posts that we covered. We have a spreadsheet that we track it, and we benchmark it against the institutional like strategic messages that we need to put out. Are we hitting the messages that we need to? Because I think because social media is so instantaneous, and it's easy to just kind of go with the flow of things and not like check in. So it is important to continuously go back and look and how you're doing and listening. I think that's the most important thing, is just listening to your community.
Absolutely. And I think when I think about student workers and bringing them on board and shaping an internship for them, starting a conversation with what are your career goals and what skill sets do you want to gain over the course of the internship. And you're right that it's up to us to then create those opportunities for them. Yeah. And we're not part of the learning enterprise. I'm putting that in air quotes, but we're not faculty, right? But we still have an opportunity to impact education for a student and to give them those skill sets that they maybe won't learn in a classroom, or the portfolio pieces that they maybe won't pick up from taking a class. And so we are part of that learning enterprise, and curating an experience for them is important.
Yeah, and I think especially like in this kind of capacity, like in such a visual medium, like all of the students who have graduated from our program, like the second student ambassador that I ever had, like he studied neuroscience at Wheaton, carried on doing pre-med, and his side gig is photography, wedding photography, and this is how he's funding his education. One of our current employees got a huge internship this summer, like creating content specifically because of the content they create for Wheaton. This is how they found them, like on Instagram, on a partnership that we did with Niche. And they were discovered through that post and asked if they were interested in applying, and they did and got the internship. One of our previous students ended up at an internship at Universal, like music. This is like such a huge opportunity for career development and professional development, that like finding like the goals for them. Like one of our students was just interested in learning video editing, and that was it. Like, so we made sure that the project that they worked on provided the ample opportunity and mentorship to do those things, and the tools, right? Because sometimes I believe they're a first year student, so you don't get into those classes until like maybe a sophomore or junior year. So like going in with kind of this leg up because of this experience is great, right? And having that on your resume, if you're applying for internships in your junior year, like, you know what, not only am I learning about it, but here's how I executed it. So we do start those conversations early on, and we continue to engage in them. One of the students we recruited was our history major, and like second year in, they decided to switch to film and new media because they enjoy the work so much and they wanted to pursue it for a career. So again, staying engaged with them and understanding their needs and how we can support it is definitely important.
Yes, you're going to still maybe have to do this data entry, but is there other skills or other experiences that you want to have for your resume? And I think we know better now, and so we need to do better.
Yeah. My job as a student was I did surveys for a cancer research center on campus on the phone. It was like you clocked in, sat at your desk, did the surveys and closed them out, and then you left. Like there wasn't like, what can you get out of this? And again, it wasn't an internship, it was just a job, right? I think there's just so much more that we can do from this vantage point. Again, like I learned valuable skills in that job that I still have with me. But I think if there was more intentionality about it, like I started in the sciences and I wanted to stay in the sciences, but it just didn't feel like something meant for people who looked like me, right? Like my manager at this job was another student who looked entirely different from me. And I'm like, I will never make it there. And I never did, right? Not because I'm not smart. Or again, those opportunities were just never extended to me. And there was no engagement in assessing, again, my level of interest even, not just like skill, but not even interest in whether or not I wanted something more.
Tell me a little bit, have you been able to gauge if what you've changed has had the impact that you set out to do?
This past year was the first year in this model. We learned a lot of valuable things as we went. Like, again, we learned some lessons about salary expectations, whether we're meeting them or not. And we also have started like some deeper conversations with like at a much senior level about who we are as an institution and which values do we want to talk about. Like, because again, I think a lot of it can be driven by the community, but the institution has also to kind of back it up. So from that level, like it's an ongoing work. And how, like, can we evolve? But from the things that we set out to do, like, we wanted to diversify our workforce, and we did. We wanted to create a community of belonging. We had 2 new hires and, like, one student that had already been. Would they be able to, like, kind of create community for themselves? Would they be engaged? Would they want to come back to this? And they do. So we're happy to, like, welcome back, like, our previous students and another student this semester. Well, hopefully this semester when we hire a new one, but like, again, keeping them engaged in again, creating the community and a sense of belonging for them and something that they look forward to coming back to. Like I have a group chat with our students. There's an active countdown for when they're coming back, and we're looking forward to welcoming them to campus. From an institutional level, there's still a little bit of work that we need to do in kind of determining which like messages or which conversations that we want to be a part of. The deal group that I mentioned took this up also this semester. So we have like kind of a awareness months that we believe align with our vision and with our mission as an institution, and beginning to like sketch out like which approach do we want to take on this one, you know, like is this a message that would be best delivered by the institution or by a student, by a club, by like a historical perspective on what it is that we have done. So that work is ongoing. But that is something that we had not previously done intentionally, right? We were like, oh, National Trans Awareness Day, let's tap into the conversation. But now we're looking at it like more like, okay, what is it that Wheaton has to say about this? Who should be delivering this message? And so that is something else that we're doing and working with our students on it, but also with college leadership. We are checking in frequently about the culture we're creating. Again, like in my presentation, I said I was actively pursuing for compensation, but we have gotten there. Like I've gotten approval for a better budget that better fits the needs for our students. So it's still a work in progress, but I think we are headed in the right direction. We have certainly hit a lot of the milestones that we wanted to at this point, but it is ongoing work.
I think that's really important to think about. The idea that this is ongoing. This isn't a one semester or one academic year where you figure it out and then you just have it. Where can people find you if they're interested in following you or having a conversation with you about what you did?
Yeah, well, I'm very easy. Anice Barbosa everywhere. I'm probably the only person with this name. But I'm really tapped in on Twitter. Like that's the easiest way to find me. Also on LinkedIn, Anice Barbosa. I'm happy to chat about this. I think it's a very important conversation for all of us to engage in. And if my experience can help somebody else, I'm happy to sit down with you, talk and ideate. After my case presentation, I've received a lot of outreach about this. I've shared my presentation with folks, shared my time too. So I'm open to continue this conversation with others.
I would love to hear from you about your thoughts on what we talked about today and whether it's something that you're thinking about or something that you've done to try to create more equitable and inclusive practices in your office. You can join the conversation using the hashtag HigherEdCMO on Twitter. You can also find me there. I'm happy to have a conversation, share my insights if you're interested in them. I am at Jaime Hunt IMC. That's JaimeHunt IMC. And to the listeners, have a wonderful day and let's go bust some silos.
Hey y'all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO with Jaime Hunt. If you like this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at enrollify.org.